Throughout his brief tenure on Earth, man has disturbed the natural order like no other species that existed before or after him. While other species outnumber humans, are larger in size, physically stronger, can run faster, jump higher, reproduce more prodigiously, and have keener sensory perception, for better or for the worse, man has surpassed them all intellectually. Man can divide atoms, map distant galaxies, encode memories into machines, and calculate the age of stars whose light began traveling to Earth long before human civilizations existed. Yet, notwithstanding his glorious list of achievements, ironically, man has yet to unravel the inner workings of his own mind. He has been unable to explain, beyond multiple theories, the origins of life, or to fully understand the finality that comes with death and the hereafter. These subjects continue to remain a mystery to him. Perhaps these mysteries are unsolvable by some predetermined cosmic design. Perhaps they will continue to resist discovery for as long as man rules the planet. Perhaps answers will come once self-aware, artificially intelligent beings take control of the reins. One may opine that the answers to life's eternal questions are unknowable because, in his never-ending quest to understand how his own mind works, man has simultaneously been both the observer and subject, examiner and evidence, microscope and specimen in his own thought experiments, a fatally flawed research design in which man's biases and ignorance, not the truth, take center stage and continue to reveal themselves in lieu of the facts. Despite his sensory and perceptual limitations, man has remained incurably curious, but curiosity alone is seldom sufficient to solve the intractable. Solving problems requires tenacity, a belief that the truth exists, and that persistence will eventually force it to come out from hiding. Most men are content not to know things. It is said, what you don't know cannot hurt you. And maybe for those men who adopt this line of thinking, this strategy is entirely correct. They've already learned that anything truly worth knowing is unknowable, so why otherwise waste the time? Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance offers these men a comfortable recliner to sit in, while they while away the hours with a beer bottle in one hand and a remote control in the other, remaining comatose and oblivious to reality. FBI Special Agent Peter Hayward never learned how to take comfort in said recliner. He possessed a disciplined intellect, an investigator's patience, and the nose of a bloodhound once truth laid its scent upon the ground. For him, knowledge was power, not corruptible power, but the type of power that led to informed decision-making. On this particular afternoon, Hayward's quest for knowledge led him to Batesville, Indiana, to a casket factory, and perhaps to yet another dead end in his investigation. The Batesville Casket Company stood beneath a pale Midwestern sky. Its brick buildings and metal roofs stretched across acres of a Rust Belt industrial park. Peter Hayward arrived promptly for his 1 o'clock appointment with the company's chief financial officer, John Sterling. Sterling had spoken to Hayward several times by telephone and understood precisely why the FBI had to visit the factory. He greeted Hayward in the lobby without ceremony. "Agent Hayward? Mr. Sterling? I thought you might want to see how we make them." "Caskets?" Sterling nodded. Hayward accepted immediately. For a man whose life had been recently dominated by 42 coffins, Hayward knew nothing about how they were made. The tour began with raw materials: steel sheets, hardwoods, interior fabrics, hardware. Hayward watched metal pressed into shape, wood carved, seams stitched, surfaces polished, handles being attached, and interiors fitted with satin and velvet. Caskets moved along conveyors with solemn efficiency, empty vessels awaiting passengers who were on their way to enjoy their afterlife. Each received a serial number, each number given a QR code scanned as a manufacturing record. Hayward inspected the scanning process very carefully. "Could a number be duplicated?" he asked. "Not through our system." Could someone build a casket here without entering it? Sterling shook his head. Not 42 of them, not even one. At the end of the production line, Hayward placed one hand upon a completed lid. It was cold to the touch. He imagined the 42 caskets excavated from Thomas Martin's backyard. No graves had been dug beneath the headstones, yet the earth had produced 42 caskets bearing Batesville markings, serial numbers, and craftsmanship easily recognizable as coming from the Batesville product line. Objects with no manufacturing history, artifacts without an origin, a result without a cause. Back in Sterling's office, Hayward showed Sterling photographs of the 42 caskets in the possession of the FBI. "Can you identify these?" asked Hayward. "They sure as hell look like they're ours," replied Sterling. Sterling turned his computer monitor toward Hayward. Together they searched every serial number supplied by the FBI, one by one, year after year, 20 years of meticulous computer files. Nothing, not a single fabrication date associated with them. No customer orders, no distributors, no shipping manifests, nothing that corresponded with the coffins in question. Sterling leaned back. "This is what I already told you over the phone." Hayward continued staring at the screen. "Yes. Then why come all this way?" "I had to see it for myself." Sterling understood. There were facts one could read, and facts one had to stand beside before accepting them as the truth. Hayward returned his pen and legal pad to his briefcase. "To close out our investigation, we'll need to impound the company's computer systems, examine every nut and bolt in the factory, and talk to anyone and everyone who currently works here, or who has ever worked here for the past 5 years. Our local field office will coordinate it." "How long do you estimate this will take?" "A minimum of 2 weeks." Sterling gave a tired laugh. "It really doesn't matter." Hayward looked at him. In a matter-of-fact way, Sterling answered, "We're shutting down next month." "Temporarily?" "No, permanently." Sterling walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. He began to speak. "Since the Thomas Martin story broke, we haven't sold a single casket." "That seems difficult to believe," said Hayward. Sterling replied, "Difficult for me as well. I thought sales would jump knowing that Martin got his coffins from us. I figured that if people believed that Martin could speak with his deceased family members, it might be because they were buried in one of our coffins. Our sales pitch to customers was that our coffins offered them the best chance of communicating with their own deceased family members." Sterling shook his head. "But to the contrary, I guess people didn't want caskets associated with Martin. In the back of their minds, they were afraid the connection could go either way." Below them on the factory floor, workers continued assembling caskets that no one would ever purchase. "Then the aquamation came along," Sterling said. Hayward looked puzzled. "Aquamation?" he asked. "Water cremation," said Sterling. "The dead body is dissolved in an alkaline solution. Only the bones remain, and then they're pulverized into a powder somewhat like the way cremated remains are. The liquid can be treated and returned to the environment," Sterling said, as he gestured to the factory. "Less expensive, less material, lower emissions, no burial vault, no expensive casket. We lost all of our Canadian business once they legalized aquamation over the border. That was 34% of our total sales. Whoever patented that damn aquamation process can go to hell as far as I'm concerned." In listening to Sterling, it was deja vu all over again for Hayward. Same obituary, different business. 2 weeks earlier at the Newport sweet shop, it was chocolate. Now it's caskets. Factories closed, workers displaced. Farmers ruined, merchants harassed. A $22 billion cocoa industry brought to its knees by poison candy, placed inside impossible coffins. Now it was a casket industry, poisoned by fear. Thomas Martin had thrown one stone into a pond. Ripples had already crossed oceans. Now they traveled underground through graveyards. Hayward stood and offered Sterling his hand. "I'm sorry. You didn't cause it." "No," Sterling said, but Hayward was no longer certain who had. And now it is time for us to take a brief respite to listen to an intermezzo conceived by world-renowned composer E. Dudek, after which the saga of Thomas Martin will resume. We continue. On the drive to the airport, Hayward's cell phone pinged. The message came from an unidentifiable number. Dead end. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. A second message appeared. Quit now while you're ahead. Hayward pulled to the shoulder of the road. He examined the phone. No service indicator, no sender information, no traceable origin. He typed, "Who are you?" The message failed. The screen answered, "The end of the trail is not the end of the journey." Hayward looked in the rearview mirror. For an instant, the back seat appeared occupied. An elderly man sat there wearing a black suit. Thomas Martin's grandfather? Hayward spun around. The seat was empty. When he looked back at his cell phone, the messages had also disappeared. These are moments when an investigator must decide whether persistence represents courage or merely a sophisticated form of self-destruction. Peter Hayward restarted his rental car and continued to the airport. The following morning, Emily Westbrook arrived at the State Correctional Institution 25 miles outside of Ashwick. Her presence at the prison attracted none of the spectacle associated with her late brother's visit. She presented her visitor's pass. Her vehicle was searched. Her belongings were inspected. Then a guard escorted her to the visitors' hall. She did not meet the prison warden. Thomas Martin waited at a table in the center of the room in an orange uniform. Handcuffed, ankle restraints. Emily froze when she saw him. She questioned whether or not this was the same man she remembered standing outside, with quiet authority inside his mortuary, surrounded by polished wood, cold instruments, and the vast genealogical chart that had governed his existence. Their eyes met. "How are you?" they asked simultaneously. "Well, thank you," they answered together. For a moment, both smiled. They had not seen one another since the police SWAT team raided Martin's mortuary months earlier. Thereafter, their lives traveled in completely opposite directions, yet headed for the same destination. Thomas Martin had become a prisoner. Emily Westbrook had become a billionaire. Yet curiosity about the dead bound them more securely than shackles or wealth ever could. Both wanted answers. Both believed the dead possessed them. Martin knew of Emily's visit before prison officials informed him. His impossible cell phone delivered the message 2 days earlier. Emily is coming. Now she sat across from him. "Thomas, I came to make you an offer." To which Martin replied, "Your dead brother already made me an offer and I rejected it. Nonetheless, I am willing to listen." Emily said, "I know you intend to represent yourself. I know you plan to argue that your case must be dismissed because you are legally dead." "Not merely legally," replied Martin. Emily lowered her voice. "I believe you." Those 3 words affected Martin more than he allowed his face to show. Emily's sincerity and commitment were important to him. "I put together a legal team for you," she continued. "Constitutional scholars, criminal defense attorneys, forensic experts, appellate specialists, the best lawyers money can buy. "And what do you want in return?" asked Martin. "Nothing," replied Emily. Martin studied her. Her brother Eric sat with him in the same prison offering acquisition disguised as assistance. The difference being that, unlike her brother, Emily offered resources without ownership. "I want you to win," she said, "or at least receive a trial capable of confronting what actually happened." Thomas leaned back. "When I first met you, I believed you would help me find the answers I was seeking, no matter how the events unfolded." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now I know it," said Martin. Tears ran down Emily's face. "I am prepared to go it alone," said Martin, "but I am not foolish enough to reject the reinforcements you offer from the heart." "Then you accept?" "Yes, of course I accept," said Martin. Emily covered her mouth briefly. "My trial begins in 1 month," Martin continued. "Have your attorneys enter their appearances immediately. I want meetings arranged as soon as the warden will permit." "My team is ready to go," said Emily. Martin glanced toward the surveillance camera above them. "Your team of living attorneys will handle civil procedure. The dead will handle precedent." Emily understood he was not speaking metaphorically. He told her that, through his deceased grandfather, he had already communicated with Plato, Cicero, Blackstone, Clarence Darrow, Daniel Webster, and jurists whose names had vanished from ordinary memory. They provided the logical basis for his legal arguments, as well as the oratory to deliver them. In combination, Martin supervised the living, working alongside the dead. No other defendant in history had assembled such a distinguished and capable legal team. Martin's meeting with Emily's legal team began the next morning. They continued for 30 days straight from breakfast until evening lockdown. Emily attended each one. Attorneys filled the conference room with files, statutes, forensic reports, death certificates, constitutional arguments, and questions no court had ever addressed. Could fingerprints from deceased persons be admitted as evidence without a living chain of custody? Could supernatural communications be authenticated? Could Thomas Martin be both a defendant and a decedent? Could the state imprison a man whose own gravestone recorded his death before his arrest? Martin listened closely to his new legal advisors. Emily took notes, and whenever the living attorneys reached an impasse, Martin's hidden cell phone vibrated beneath the table. Suggestions appeared, questions, counter-arguments, admonitions from the dead. One evening, after the attorneys departed, Emily remained seated beside him. "Do you think we can win?" Martin smiled when he heard Emily say, "we." From their first meeting in her home in Ashwick, Martin wanted her on his team. Martin paused and looked toward the darkened window. "Emily, we have already won. We've won something more important." "What?" "We have placed the question of eternal life on trial in a courtroom." Outside, a train whistle sounded. There were no active tracks within miles of the prison. Emily heard it too. The room seemed to lengthen. The fluorescent lights became brass lamps. The cement floor transformed into a railway platform. For one suspended instant, Thomas and Emily were no longer seated in a prison conference room. They stood side by side beneath an iron sign, Platform 1. A black locomotive awaited in clouds of white steam. Its destination board read, Ashwick Superior Court. The conductor possessed no face. He raised one gloved hand. "All aboard!" Then the vision vanished. The conference room returned to its original state. Thomas remained shackled. Emily remained beside him. On the table lay 2 punch tickets. One had Thomas Martin's name, the other Emily Westbrook's. An investigator who pursued evidence until the trail led beyond manufacture, memory, and mortality. A woman who inherited a fortune and spent it purchasing a defense rather than luxuries. And a prisoner represented by the greatest legal minds among both the living and the dead. Peter Hayward had been warned that he had reached a dead end. He would soon discover that, in the affairs of Thomas Martin, a dead end was merely another name for a doorway. Thomas and Emily boarded no ordinary train. Its destination was a courtroom. Its cargo consisted of evidence that could not exist. Its passengers included witnesses who did not breathe. and its next scheduled stop would determine whether mankind's laws governed the dead or whether the dead had come to place mankind on trail. Departure was imminent from Platform 1 at the Conflation Station.